I do think, as been noted, that the European role is potentially very significant. It could be very significant. North Korea has reached out to Europe on multiple occasions and is doing that even today, even if it's also basically has refused to let European states open up their embassies in Pyongyang. Because I also think that when I speak to my North Korean friends in Pyongyang and here in Europe, I think there is a realization among them that they understand that the engagement with Russia that we have today is at best midterm, shorter midterm. The Russian war machine is starting to rebuild. The production is getting better in Russia itself. So they know that they're not going to play that pivotal role in the future, and therefore they are seeking to expand. But the question is, does Europe have the capacity to do this? This is especially in the shadow of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The interest from Europe, I mean, I think we have to be honest on this, is on Ukraine, especially among countries like Sweden and Finland, that traditionally has been very much engaged. We focus on Ukraine to a large extent, and then of course we have Middle East. We thank God the response from Israel today was very modest, and I think we have to be grateful for that. That is a priority in many European states. And that also drains a lot of the financial resources, humanitarian resources, again, especially in Finland and Sweden, who just joined NATO. We will focus much more on NATO and the regional context, and therefore the Korean Peninsula becomes much less important. But if Europe would be able to take that role, there is a lot of possibilities. North Korea has an interest, despite its contact with Russia. It wants to balance China as well. The problem we have is that North Korea knows that time is on its side, or at least they think so. They don't need to engage in a dialogue and discussion today, especially if it's threatening their national interests. And denuclearization is definitely one of these national interests. They're not going to engage in any dialogue that forces them towards denuclearization. And they also have a very strong expectation when it comes to President Trump. Right now, they're waiting for the re-election of President Trump. And I think the bets are to a very high extent in Pyongyang on President Trump. And that also complicates things. So they're probably going to keep the pot boiling with engagement with Japan, with Europe, and that it's not really going to be allowing potentially for a true engagement. And I think we have to be, I'm a tad pessimistic of the short-term possibilities here. On the other hand, there are things that we can do. And I mean, before here, it was mentioned, 1.5 track diplomacy, academic exchanges. The North Koreans are very much engaged in this. We have a constant inflow of North Koreans at our institute, not during the pandemic, of course. But the North Koreans are willing to engage in these sort of 1.5 track diplomacy events. But it's not going to be satisfactory to many people. Many people want to see a quick solution. I don't see a quick solution in the making, especially then with the demand from the outside and the West, a very legitimate demand of denuclearization. But North Korea this is putting them back. And I think what we need to create is really a Helsinki process of type. The North Korean, despite the idea of the Helsinki process, because they know that that laid the ground for the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but maybe we can create an Arirang process, an Arirang process that takes the Korean characteristics into account, because we need to be able to move on other issues than denuclearization. We need to be able to move on issues of humanitarian assistance, environment, water issues, tangible issues that is maybe sort of moving under the surface and not touching the sanctions that much. So there are possibilities that I think that we should acknowledge, but it doesn't lead to resolution. This is, I think we need to think about the Korean Peninsula as a long-term process where engagement is important. And I do think that, just to mention a bit of the word on the naming of South Korea as a hostile state, we heard this already in 2015, 2016. And it wasn't really about South Korea as much as it was about the difference between North and South. The North Koreans realized that unification was no longer possible on an equal footing. They knew that South Korea was becoming so strong, economically, militarily, in every possible way, that unification would be under South Korean flag. So naming South Korea as a hostile nation enables Kim Jong-un to dispatch of his grandfather's and his father's legacy and putting the blame on South Korea. But I think over time, it is very much feasible to bring the South Koreans to the table with the North Koreans. But unification, I do remain a bit skeptical on that, simply because the differences between North and South, and as was mentioned here, how do you protect the leaders' assets? How do you protect their housing? How do you protect their future, the pensions, etc.? That's going to be extremely difficult, and the North Koreans know that. And that's why they have this two-state solution. But in this, I think Europe can be very helpful in bridging that sort of gap between the actors in this conflict. But I'll leave it at this, and I'm open for all the questions. So thank you.